I was asked if I would if you could only choose one saturation plugin, what would you choose and why? So that's what we're doing here. And what I would select would be the black box from Plugin Alliance. And the reason why is because it sounds good on pretty much any source material. It's always audible. Like you can always kind of hear that it's working and doing something, but it takes a lot to make it like really distort audibly. And sometimes that is what you're going for, like on an individual kick drum sound or on some kind of really kind of plasticky sample. But for the most part with saturation, I'm always thinking, I'm going to try to give myself some headroom. So I want to, clip off the peak a little bit, and then I want to add density. And I think that this particular plugin does that really well, and it works on pretty much everything. I'm not going to focus in on tape plugins here, or at least I'm not going to show them here. That is another type of like saturation that I would almost put in its own category. And I love tape plugins. I love using satin. I like the soft tube tape. Those are both really easy to work with. The gem like channel or tape, whatever that thing is called, that one's really nice where it has both a like mixing console desk and then also you can run it through tape. I like all three of those, use them in different circumstances and different scenarios. And that's the thing with saturation too, is what you find with this category of plugin compared to almost any other is that you're going to pull to a certain plugin in certain situations. So if I'm working on drums, I could use the black box analog design, but I'd probably be more likely to want to go to something like Decapitator. If I'm working on a synth bus, I might be more likely to use something like Bus Colors from Air Windows or the black box analog design, and I'd be less likely to use something like Decapitator. And we'll look at a few other examples here too. Certain plugins, I'm really not sure how we would classify them. So one of the plugins that I use on the master bus a lot is Luxe from Clevgard. I don't know how you pronounce it. And I'm not sure if that's technically a saturator or if that's more of like an exciter. But anyway, let's go in and let's do a few audio examples here. The first plugin we're going to look at is Luxe, which might technically be more of an exciter and less of a saturator. There is no output control on it, so we are going to be adding a tiny bit of gain to our signal, but that's okay, just so you can hear what it does. I typically will put this on the master bus between like 5 and 10 or 5 and 15, and then choose one of the two modes depending on what sounds better for that genre. This one's a little bit darker, more mid-rangey, and then this one's a little more sheeny. So let's just take a listen. So for that loop, I'd probably prefer the Finesse, but it's a plugin that I really like and do use in almost every single track, even if it's just in small bits. But that one doesn't really count because I don't really think that's technically a saturator. However, it is adding some harmonics and some density to the signal source. The next thing we can look at are a few plugins from Air Windows. Now, whereas Luxe was going to add a couple dB, I think with pretty much all of these different models, Bus Colors actually will save you a couple dB, and then you can use some additional plugins after that. So we have like an Air Windows chain here that I will use on different kinds of buses. Sometimes like the synth bus, sometimes the drum bus. It just depends, but this is a common combo that I use. So you just kind of choose what you like. I almost always end up going with either Lush or Vibe because they seem to add the most. When we bring this on, it is going to be in dark mode. It's a little too bright, so we're going to go with Lush. That might emphasize the low end a bit too much, but that's okay. We'll see if we can make up for it. Interstage is a plugin that's just sometimes good to throw on when you have like a long chain of things that seems to add some like non-linearities or whatever. I don't know. Maybe it's all just a bunch of hooey, but I like using it sometimes. And then we're going to go into tape here at the end. And let's just look here first. So you can hear the density that we've already brought in. And now we'll run it into the tape. Gonna see if that helps a little bit with the low end. Cool. And then to be honest, what we might do is add purest air coming out of this to bring back some of the highs since we've brought down the bump. And so with all of these plugins on, we're actually still down 1 dB in like peak volume. And let's listen to them on and off. This purest air may not be necessary. So this is a fairly common processing chain for me, not always with the purest air on here, but in this case, it seemed like it might have needed it. But yeah, so don't sleep on the air window stuff. They have other saturators and distortions as well. They have tube models and things like that, but this bus colors into the tape usually works extremely well if you're going for what I was talking about before, adding density. And I think there actually is a plugin called Density that you can use also. Let's use density instead of tape and see how it goes. There's something getting built up in the low mids that we would have to address with a different processor. But yeah, again, this one's like 1 dB quieter. So yeah, just other plugins you can experiment with. I know Air Windows isn't everybody's cup of tea because it doesn't really have an interface, but just trust your ears, and the stuff that it says it does, if you just read it, is usually what ends up happening. Like you can hear how much density that is bringing in. We could drive that and then put it more into a parallel configuration. That might work well. Yep. It's just that buildup in the low mids that's really driving me crazy. But that, again, could easily be addressed with a different processor. Alrighty, now we can get to the actual meat of the video. Here we have Vintage Warmer, which again, I don't know if we should be allowed to showcase this one in the saturation video, but it's kind of a tapey thing. It's kind of a saturation thing. It sounds great. This plugin has been around for a really long time and it always delivers. So you can put this on buses, you could put it on individual channels, but primarily, again, this would go on a bus, whether it's a synth bus, a bass bus, whatever, drum bus, master bus, and it works as you'd expect. You can drive it in and then you have like limiters and other things. I'll just set it up the way I would probably set up on this sound so you get an idea. You can see how you're driving in pre, and then we have our gain reduction, which is what we're going to be looking at here. So there is a limiter that we can turn on, and we could also go into multiband mode, which is better for buses like this. I'll just turn the release to auto, and let's go ahead and set up some things. Brick wall limiter is on. Bring that all the way down here so our sound is not really going to be coming out above minus 12 dB. So again, just remember that this thing is peaking out at like -6 and we're already down to -12. You can hear some distortion on there. I'm gonna try to back off a little bit. Then I'm just gonna add back in some highs. There we go. We're getting a little bit of the bounce back in there. cool. Turn on fat mode. Yeah, we can see how hard we're actually slamming it. So yeah, maybe a little more aggressive than it needs to be, but that gives you an idea of how vintage warmer works. You can put this on virtually anything similar to the black box analog design, and you're going to get a really good result. So just wanted to show that one to you guys quickly in case you are interested in finding new tools that you weren't aware of before. And down to our final two plugins, we're going to look at Decapitator next. This is, again, one of these all-time classics. This plugin has like a bad rap online for some reason. I don't really know why, but it's still a pretty industry standard and gets used a lot, especially in production stages on things like 808s and drums and individual sounds. You don't typically use this on the bus, and that is the reason why it wouldn't be my go-to, because it usually doesn't work that well in this application. However, we'll still be able to probably find a setting in here that's pretty flattering and, is applying saturation in a nice way. But this is typically more associated with heavier types of distortion, but can work, again, in a lot of situations if you know what you're doing and are just kind of gentle and careful with things. So let's take a listen. So as you can see, we've saved like 1.5 dB of headroom, and we've gotten like a much brighter kind of tone. I have worked it back in parallel. And interestingly, this T style, at least for me personally, I don't think I've ever used on an individual sound, like a kick drum sound or a snap or whatever. But as you can tell on the bus, like that's the mode that seems to sound the best for this particular source material. So again, this is an amazing one. I wouldn't sleep on it. If you can get it in a bundle for cheap, it's worth picking up. This is still my go-to for individual drum sounds, just because it's what I'm used to doing and what I've done for now like 10 or 12 years. But anyway, let's go ahead and move on to our winner of this little competition, which is the black box. And here we have the black box. We'll go ahead and turn it on. And again, without touching any additional settings, it already sounds pretty good. And that's why I like this thing so much. So again, this can be used on individual parts. It can be used on buses. Obviously, we're using it on like a bus here just to hear what it can do. But you have control over sort of your different harmonics. This on a signal like this, I would be leaving in flat. But for other source materials, like let's say you had a guitar or something and it's really low, mid-rangey, you could flip this over to high, and that actually does like a pretty nice tonal balance as well. And then that's focusing in where that saturation is going to be occurring. So let's just go ahead and set this up. We'll kind of go as far as maybe we can with it. And yeah, and then try to match gain. Seems like we could crank it all the way. So this is us basically matching gain. This is really extreme settings, and you can still hear that it's pretty flattering. Let's hear how much perceived gain it's added. Yep. So yeah, I don't think I would normally run it in that hot or that hard, but it works. It always has a flattering effect. It's really easy to work with, and that's a big part about this. Like, I don't need to know what triode means. I don't need to know what harmonics that's emphasizing or not. Same thing with like pentode. I don't need to know any of that stuff. I can just drive it until my ear says, okay, that's too much, or my ear says, yeah, that's good, and move on to the next thing that I want to move on to. So for me, this would be my go-to one and only saturation plugin if I had to make just one choice. Luckily, again, we're in a world where we have a lot of different options. And again, I'm kind of putting tape to an aside here, even though I know we looked at some stuff that's kind of tapey, because yeah, I would have to do a whole different video on tape because I use that in different scenarios and circumstances. But hopefully this has been helpful and interesting. Feel free to share your go-to saturation plugin down in the comments. For a lot of people, wouldn't surprise me if it's the one from FabFilter, Saturn, because that one you can really multi-band and you can isolate out a certain frequency if you need to try to add some excitement there. I typically go about that a different way, but I think that would be a plugin that you might want to check out as well, especially if you're more in the world of sound design and really wanting complete control and manipulation ability. Otherwise, you could probably get away with Black Box here because it's just amazing at what it does. Thanks so much for watching and have a wonderful day. Take care.